Arrival, the sky was dark, and the stars looked sharp and cold above the lonely planet. 30 human warriors stood inside their ship, waiting for the door to open. They wore heavy armor and carried big guns. No one spoke. Only the sound of their breathing filled the silence. Commander Ray looked at his team. They were the best soldiers he had. Strong, brave, ready for anything. But even he could feel it. This planet was strange. It was too quiet, too still, like the air was holding its breath. Finally, the ship's door opened with a loud hiss. A cold wind rushed inside. The warriors stepped out, one by one, onto the rocky ground. The planet was covered in black dust. The sky above them was gray and heavy. There was no sun, no birds, no life. They had a mission. A simple one, or so they thought. Find the enemy, kill them, go home. But something in the air made everyone uneasy. Stay close, Commander Ray said. Keep your eyes open. They walked forward into the darkness. Their boots crunched on the ground. Strange shapes of broken buildings stood around them. It looked like a city long dead. Walls were cracked, windows smashed, streets empty. Private Lane, the youngest soldier, whispered to his friend, "Where are the enemies?" "I don't see anyone." No one answered. But everyone was thinking the same thing. Where was the enemy? Why was this place so empty? Suddenly, a sound came from ahead. A faint cry, like someone calling for help. The warriors stopped. Everyone raised their guns. "Did you hear that?" asked Sergeant Cole. "Yes," Commander Ray said. "Move carefully." They followed the sound down a narrow street. The buildings here were even more ruined. Strange shadows moved on the walls as their flashlights shone around. The cry came again, louder this time. At the end of the street, they saw 3 figures standing in the darkness. At first, the warriors thought they were enemies, but then the lights revealed them. 3 alien women stood there, wearing white uniforms. Their skin was pale blue, and their eyes glowed faintly in the dark. Each of them held a strange bag full of tools and lights. The warriors aimed their guns. The aliens didn't move. They just stood there, calm and quiet. "Who are you?" Commander Ray demanded. One of the women stepped forward. She was tall, with long silver hair tied behind her. She raised her hands to show she carried no weapon. "We are nurses," she said in a soft voice. "We mean no harm." The soldiers looked at each other. No one expected to find nurses here. "What are you doing on this planet?" Ray asked. Another nurse spoke this time. "We came to help, but now we cannot leave." The third nurse nodded. "We know what is coming. You need us." Ray narrowed his eyes. "You know what is coming? What do you mean?" The first nurse only said, "Trust us. If you want to survive, you must trust us." Before Ray could say anything else, the ground under their feet began to shake. Dust fell from the broken walls. A deep, low roar echoed through the streets. The sound was not like anything human or animal. It was bigger, darker. It felt like the planet itself was growling. The warriors turned around, looking in all directions. The ground shook again. From somewhere far ahead, a strange light flashed behind a building, red and bright. "Commander?" Lane said nervously. "What is that?" Ray didn't answer. He was staring at the nurses. They didn't look scared. They just stood there, watching the darkness. The tall nurse finally spoke. "They are awake now," she said. "You should listen to us." Then the roar came again, louder this time. A shadow moved at the end of the street, big and fast. The warriors raised their guns and aimed. But the shadow was gone before they could fire. The commander turned back to the nurses. "What is out there?" he demanded. The nurse looked him in the eyes. Her voice was calm but cold. "Death," she said, "and it is coming for all of you." Another roar, even closer this time. The walls shook. A soldier fired his gun in the darkness, but nothing was there. "Commander, we need orders." Cole shouted. Ray took a deep breath. He could feel the fear in his men, but he couldn't let them see it in him. He looked at the nurses one more time. They stood there waiting. Their glowing eyes seemed to see everything, things he could not. Finally, he lowered his gun. "All right," he said. "You three, come with us, but no tricks. If you know something, you better tell me." The nurses nodded silently. Ray turned to his team. "We move. Stay sharp." They began walking again, deeper into the dead city. The roar behind them faded for a moment, but everyone knew it was still there, watching, waiting, and the nurses followed quietly, their white uniforms bright against the dark streets. One of them whispered something to herself, words the humans could not understand. The warriors didn't hear. They were too busy watching the shadows. But the nurses smiled faintly, because they already knew the real battle had just begun. Asterisk the first, attack thee. Dead City swallowed them as they moved deeper into its black heart. Broken towers leaned over the cracked streets. Walls were covered in strange mark scratches, burns, holes like something had chewed through stone. Above them, the gray clouds thickened until it felt like night. Even though the planet had no proper day, the 30 warriors stayed close, guns ready, scanning every corner. Behind them, the 3 alien nurses walked silently. Their pale blue skin glowed faintly in the dark. Their eyes darted from shadow to shadow, as if they could see something the humans couldn't. Private Lane kept glancing at the nurses. He whispered. To Cole, "They don't even look scared." Cole shook his head. "They know something. Look at them. Calm as ghosts." Commander Ray, leading the group, stopped at a crossroads. Ahead was a wide square with shattered statues and a dry fountain in the middle. To the left, a narrow street full of darkness. To the right, an archway leading underground. Ray spoke. Without turning, "You, nurses, which way?" The tall nurse stepped forward. Her glowing eyes studied the 3 paths. Then she pointed toward the underground archway. "That way," she said simply. Ray hesitated. The air down there smelled worse than above, like something rotting in the shadows. But the ground behind them rumbled again. Another roar, closer now, rose from somewhere unseen. Ray made his choice. Move out, underground. They passed through the archway and began descending. The air grew colder with every step. The walls here were smoother, darker, covered in strange symbols that no human could read. Then they reached a massive open hall. It was enormous, with a cracked glass ceiling, atlet in faint gray light. Rusted metal scaffolding hung above. On the floor, scattered bones and pieces of old armor crunched under their boots. The nurses stopped walking. The tall one raised her hand. "Stop here," she whispered. The soldiers froze. The silence in the hall was heavy. Suddenly something moved. A shadow darted across the ceiling. Another slipped behind a column. The warriors raised their guns, eyes wide, fingers on triggers. Then came the sound. A sharp scraping noise, like claws dragging across stone. It came from all around them. And then the air shimmered. Figures began to appear, cloaked in strange light, like heat waves. They were tall, thin, but twisted. Their arms were too long, ending in sharp claws. Their heads were wrong. Flat, eyeless, mouths full of thin teeth. One by one, they emerged from the dark. 10, 20 more, completely surrounding the humans. Lane gasped. What are they?" The tall nurse stepped in front of the humans. "They are the ones who remain," she said softly. Ray barked. "Open fire." Bullets tore through the hall, lighting up the shadows. The creatures shrieked a horrible, high-pitched sound that shook the walls. One soldier fired at a creature climbing down the wall, but it moved too fast. It dropped to the ground, slashed at him with claws, and the man fell, screaming. Two more. Creatures attacked from above. Warriors shot them down, but more kept coming, crawling out of cracks in the floor, the ceiling, the walls themselves. Chaos filled the hall. A creature lunged at Ray. He fired 3 rounds into its chest, but it didn't stop. Only when one of the nurses raised her strange weapon, like a rod of bright white light, and stabbed it through the head, did it finally fall. The nurse looked at Ray. Her voice was cold and calm. Bullets won't save you. Not here. She turned and slashed another creature with her light weapon. It shrieked and crumbled into ash. Ray shouted over the noise. "Why didn't you tell us they're invisible?" The nurse didn't answer. She simply moved forward, her rod glowing brighter. Behind Ray, Lane screamed. A creature had grabbed him and was pulling him into the dark. Cole fired at it, but missed. Lane's scream faded into silence. Another soldier disappeared, snatched from behind a pillar. No time to see who. The nurses moved like they had done this before. Their weapons cut through the creatures with ease. But they didn't look at the humans. They didn't try to save them. Ray ordered the remaining soldiers. Form a circle. Stay together. They backed into the center of the hall, guns pointing outward. The creatures closed in slowly, crawling over the walls, the floor, even the ceiling. One of the nurses knelt beside a wounded soldier. Instead of helping him, she touched his chest and whispered something. His eyes widened in terror. Then he went still. Ray saw it. "What the hell did you just do?" The nurse stood, her expression blank. "He was already lost," she said. The creatures suddenly stopped moving. The silence returned. Then the largest creature yet stepped out of the shadows. It was massive, twice the size of a man. Its body was covered in black plates, its mouth full of rows of teeth, its claws dripping with dark liquid. Its presence made the air colder, heavier. The nurses looked at each other. For the first time, their calm faces showed something else. Fear. The tall nurse spoke to Ray without looking at him. "This is only the beginning," she said quietly. Ray gritted his teeth, his eyes locked on the monster. "Then tell me," he growled. "How do we end it?" The nurse's glowing eyes turned to him. "You don't," she whispered. And then the monster roared so loud the walls cracked, and it charged straight at them. The roar of the monster shook the underground hall. Cracks spread across the walls. Dust fell from the ceiling. The massive creature charged at the circle of warriors, its claws glowing faintly in the dark. "Hold the line," Commander Ray shouted. The humans fired everything they had. Bullets slammed into the monster's black armor, sparks flying, but it didn't stop. The nurses moved faster than human eyes could follow. Their glowing weapons cut into the smaller creatures as they came closer, but even they kept glancing at the massive one. One nurse whispered something that sounded like a prayer. The beast leaped. Crashed into the circle of soldiers, sending 2 men flying into the wall. They didn't get up. Ray dove aside just in time. Cole fired his heavy gun point blank at its chest, but the gun jammed. The creature swiped its claw, and Cole disappeared under a pile of rubble. The tall nurse suddenly shouted something strange, in a language no one understood. Her weapon flared blinding white, and she thrust it into the creature's side. The monster howled and staggered back, but it wasn't dead. It glared at her, its eyeless face twisting, then retreated into the shadows, taking the rest of the creatures with it. And just like that, silence returned. Only 8 humans remained standing. Their breaths were loud and heavy in the quiet hall. Ray stared at the tall nurse. You knew it would come, didn't you? The nurse met his eyes without emotion. Yes, Ray gritted his teeth. And you didn't warn us. Why? The nurse only said, you wouldn't have believed. The warriors gathered what they could and followed the nurses through another passage. They climbed broken stairways and passed through narrow tunnels. The deeper they went, the stranger the walls became, covered in faint blue lights, glowing veins that pulsed like they were alive. Finally, they came to a vast underground chamber. In the center stood a giant stone structure, shaped like a tower, covered in alien symbols. It rose all the way to the ceiling, and at the top, something faintly glowed inside a glass cage. Ray asked, What is that? The tall nurse answered, The heart of this place. Another nurse added, If the heart stops, everything else dies. Ray stepped closer. Then why not destroy it now? But the nurses didn't reply. Instead, one of them slowly walked to the side of the chamber and pressed her hand against the wall. Without warning, the floor under the soldiers cracked open. Before they could react, the ground collapsed, dropping them into a deep pit below. Ray hit the bottom hard. Pain shot through his leg. Around him, the others groaned and struggled to stand. Above, the nurses stood at the edge, looking down at them. Their glowing eyes seemed colder now. The tall nurse spoke, her voice echoing through the pit. You have come far enough. Ray shouted. What are you doing? We're on the same side. But the nurse shook her head slowly. There is no saying. Side, she said. The glass cage at the top of the tower glowed brighter, and the faint pulsing in the walls grew faster. Around them, more creatures began to crawl out of cracks in the pit walls. Their claws scraped against the stone, their eyes burning faintly. Ray's blood ran cold. It was a trap. Guns up, he ordered, but he already knew they didn't have enough bullets left. One of the nurses above raised her rod and pointed it at the humans. You are never meant to leave this planet, she said calmly. The soldiers fired desperately at the creatures, but they were everywhere now, climbing over each other, screeching, reaching with long claws. One creature dropped onto a soldier and tore into him before he could scream. Another dragged a man into the darkness of the pit wall. Ray fired until his gun clicked empty. Then he grabbed a fallen soldier's rifle and kept firing. The nurses watched silently, their faces blank. Ray's mind raced. Why had they saved them before? Why lead them here just to kill them now? Then he noticed something. In the chaos, one nurse had stepped away from the others. She stood apart, her glowing eyes fixed on the glass cage above the tower. She glanced down at Ray, just for a second, and in that second, he saw something different in her eyes. Fear, not for herself, but for what was in the cage. She turned quickly and pretended nothing had happened. Ray understood. Not all three nurses were loyal to each other. One of them might still be on his side, but he couldn't say anything. Not yet. Around him, his men fell one by one. The creatures came faster now. Ray backed against the wall, gripping his gun, staring up at the nurses. The tall nurse spoke again. You humans are stubborn? That is why we chose this planet. To see how long you would fight before you broke. Ray growled back. You think this is over? It's not over. The tall nurse tilted her head. You don't even know what you're fighting. FOR. Then she raised her weapon and aimed it at him. But just as she swung, the third nurse moved. She struck the tall nurse's hand, knocking the weapon aside. The two other nurses turned on her in shock. Ray's heart pounded. Here it was. The crack. Between them, the third nurse looked down at Ray and shouted one word. Run. And then she leapt at the others, her rod glowing bright, knocking them back. Ray didn't wait. He grabbed what was left of his men and ran toward a dark tunnel at the far end of the pit, creatures snapping at his heels. Behind him, the sound of fighting echoed, alien weapons clashing, inhuman screams filling the air. Ray didn't look back, but in his mind, one thought burned. Why had she helped him? And what was inside that glowing cage? As he and the last few soldiers vanished into the tunnel, the ground shook again. And above them, the cage began to crack. Asterisk, the secret the tunnel was narrow, cold, and full of shadows. Ray and the 5 remaining soldiers ran without speaking. There, boots slammed against the stone floor, their breath sharp in the silent dark. Behind them, faint screams and alien roars still echoed from the pit. One of the men stumbled. Ray grabbed his arm and pulled him forward. Don't stop. Keep moving. They ran until the tunnel opened into another chamber, smaller but stranger. The walls glowed faintly blue here too, but the light was softer, almost like moonlight. The air was warmer, and the floor was smooth and black, with white lines cutting through it in strange patterns. They stopped to catch their breath. For a moment, the silence felt heavy. Ray glanced back toward the tunnel. No sound of the nurses. No sound of the creatures. But he didn't trust the quiet. Secure the area, he ordered. The soldiers raised their rifles and spread out. In the center of the chamber stood another structure. Not a tower this time, but a tall black column, with silver veins running through it. At the top of the column was a sphere of glass, faintly cracked, glowing from inside. Ray's eyes locked on it. It was the same cage they had seen above, but now much closer. Inside, something floated. At first, it looked like a ball of light. But as his eyes adjusted, Ray saw it was a live. It was shaped almost like a human, but wrong. Too thin. Too long. Its skin shimmered like liquid metal, and its face was hidden behind a veil of light. It turned slightly inside the cage, and Ray felt it looking at him, though it had no eyes. Ray swallowed hard. What the hell is that? Muttered one of the soldiers. Before Ray could answer, footsteps came from behind. The humans spun around, rifles ready. From the shadows of the tunnel, the 3rd nurse, the one who had helped them escape, stepped out slowly. She held her strange rod in one hand, but she didn't raise it. Her pale blue skin was cut and bleeding. Her uniform was torn, but her glowing eyes were steady. Ray didn't lower his weapon. Why did you help us? He demanded. The nurse looked at the cage for a moment before answering. Because you deserve to know the truth, she said quietly. Ray's grip tightened on his rifle. Then start talking. She stepped closer, keeping her eyes on the cage. This planet was a research station, she began. We were sent here to study. She nodded toward the creature inside the glass. At first, we thought it was dead or asleep, but it wasn't. It spoke to us, promised us power, knowledge, life beyond death. Her voice cracked slightly, but we were fools. It lied. It changed us, turned us into what you saw above. Ray frowned. The creatures? She shook her head. No, worse. The creatures were the first test, made from humans like you. When they failed, it used us instead. We, the nurses. We are what's left of the original team. The soldiers exchanged uneasy glances. Ray stepped closer. And what is it? The nurse finally turned to him. A god or a demon? Call it what you want. We called it the heart. It feeds on minds, on fear, on pain. It infects, changes, controls. It wants to leave this planet, but it can't, not yet. Ray narrowed his eyes. So why bring us here? The nurse's lips tightened. Because the others serve it now. They're trying to finish what we started. And you are their offering. Her voice fell into a whisper. The more you fight, the more you fear, the stronger it becomes. Ray felt a chill run through him. He stared at the cage again. The creature inside tilted its head slightly, as if amused. Then one of the soldiers cried out. They all turned. Private Lane was standing against the far wall, his hands shaking, his face pale. "Commander?" He said dot, and then he screamed. His body arched backward. His eyes turned black. His skin stretched unnaturally, claws ripping out of his fingers. The soldiers aimed at him. "Don't shoot." The nurse yelled, but Lane lunged at the nearest man, slashing his throat open. Gunfire exploded in the chamber. They fired until Lane's twisted body lay still on the ground. Ray's hands trembled as he lowered his gun. The nurse's voice was quiet again. "You see? It's already begun. It's inside all of you now." Ray glared at her. "So what do we do? How do we stop it?" For the first time, the nurse looked afraid. She whispered, "You can't." Before Ray could answer, the walls around them lit up. Dot. The other two nurses appeared in the doorway, their uniforms torn, their weapons glowing brighter than before. But their faces were different now, sharper. "Crueler. Dot." The tall one stepped forward. "You've run far enough," she said, her voice echoing with something inhuman. Ray raised his gun. The third nurse stood in front of him, facing the others. Her rod glowed as she said to him softly, without turning her head, "There's only one way. Break the cage, even if it kills you." The tall nurse laughed coldly. "You'll only set it free." She sneered. Ray felt his heart pound out between the cage, the creature inside, and the nurses closing in. He realized one thing. He didn't know who to trust anymore, but he knew one thing for sure. He couldn't let that creature leave this place. The tall nurse raised her rod and screamed, something in the alien tongue. The walls began to crack. The creature inside the cage stirred, its light growing brighter. And then the glass began to break. The betrayal. The glass cracked louder now, sharp lines of light spreading across its surface like veins of lightning. Commander Ray stood frozen, his gun still raised as the creature inside stirred. Its faint form shifted long, limbs unfurling, head tilting as though it was listening. The tall nurse grinned coldly. Her glowing rod pointed at the humans. "It wakes," she said, her voice echoing with something not human. "And nothing will stop it now." The third nurse stepped in front of Ray, her weapon raised against her own kind. Her breath was heavy, her glowing eyes full of something close to desperation. "Don't listen to her," she hissed to Ray. "If it breaks free, everything dies, even the planet itself." Ray gritted his teeth. His men formed up behind him, what little was left of them. Only four now, scared but holding their rifles tight. The tall nurse raised her rod high, and the ground under their feet shook again. The cracks in the glass widened, and then, from behind, Ray heard the sound that chilled his blood, the click of a gun. He turned just in time to see Private Jones, one of his oldest men, pointing his rifle at him. Ray's eyes narrowed. "What the hell are you doing, Jones?" But Jones's hands were steady. "We can't stop it," Jones said, his voice flat. "But she promised us we could be part of it. Not just food." Ray's stomach turned cold. The tall nurse smiled faintly, like a teacher proud of her student. "He understands," she said softly. Ray's hand tightened on his gun. "Put it down, Jones," he growled. But Jones didn't move. Behind him, another soldier, Private Barrett, lowered his own weapon and stepped closer to Jones. "He's right, Commander," Barrett said quietly. "We're already dead. You just don't see it yet." Ray's mind raced. Two of his remaining men already turned, and maybe more. Before he could react, Jones fired. The shot missed Ray by inches and slammed into the wall. The chamber exploded into chaos. The third nurse yelled something in her alien tongue. her rod sparking as she swung it at the tall nurse. Blue light crashed against blue light, the air sizzling between them. Jones and Merritt fired at their own squad mates. One soldier fell with a scream. Another dove behind a pillar. Ray rolled and fired at Jones, hitting him in the shoulder. Jones dropped his gun, but didn't even cry out, his blackened eyes staring at Ray with something inhuman now. "You can't stop it," Jones whispered, blood spilling down his arm. "It's already inside you, too." The tall nurse shouted something else, and the two soldiers who still stood loyal to Ray suddenly grabbed their heads and dropped to their knees, screaming as their eyes turned. Black. Ray's heart pounded in his ears. Everyone was turning. He stumbled back as the tall nurse advanced, her weapon glowing brighter. The third nurse blocked her again, their rods clashing in a storm of light. Ray pressed himself against the wall, looking for an opening. Then he saw it. The cage. The creature inside now stood fully awake, its body of liquid light pressed against the glass. Cracks spider-webbed outward, as its hands long and thin pressed gently on the inside of the glass. It was smiling now, at him. Ray looked down at the ground and saw one of the fallen soldier's rifles lying there. He grabbed it. The third nurse called out to him over the noise, "You have to finish it now." Ray gritted his teeth, raised the rifle, and fired at the cage. The bullet slammed into the glass, but only left a faint mark. He fired again. And again. Nothing. The tall nurse laughed as she pushed the third one backward, slamming her against the wall. "You think you can kill it?" she hissed. "You're just meat, Commander." Nothing more. Ray ignored her and ran to the base of the cage. The creature inside tilted its head and placed one hand directly over his heart, through the glass. But somehow he could feel it. Warmth spread through his chest, and his vision blurred. He staggered back, dropping the rifle. "You see now," the tall nurse said behind him, her voice soft. "You belong to it already." Ray's head spun. Images flooded his mind. Soldiers screaming, planets burning, stars collapsing, all while the creature inside watched and fed. He fell to his knees. The third nurse screamed and broke free of the tall one's hold. She ran to Ray and knelt beside him, pressing her hand to his chest. "Fight it," she said. "You're stronger than it wants you to be." Her other hand gripped his wrist, and she slipped something small and cold into his palm. He blinked and looked down. A thin shard of crystal, glowing faint white. "What is this?" he gasped. "Its heart," she whispered. "If you stab it into the cage, it will die, and so will everything it's made." The tall nurse screamed in rage as she realized what was happening. She charged forward, her rod raised high, but Ray stood. His whole body burned now, his veins dark and hot, but he forced himself to stand. "Enough," he growled. With the last of his strength, he raised the shard and plunged it into the cage. Glass shattered. The creature let out a scream, like nothing he had ever heard. A sound that split the air, split his mind, split everything. Light exploded from the cage. The tall nurse was thrown backward, her body twisting in midair before it crashed lifeless on the ground. The corrupted soldiers dropped to the floor like broken dolls. The walls cracked, the ceiling shook, and the ground split open. Ray stumbled back, the shard still glowing faintly in his hand. The creature inside the cage was gone, nothing left but ash and faint sparks of light that floated upward like dying stars. The third nurse stood beside him, her face pale and exhausted. She looked at him, her eyes dimmer now, and she whispered, "You don't know what you've started." Ray stared at her, confused. "What do you mean?" he asked, but she didn't answer. Instead, she collapsed to her knees, staring at the ash where the creature had been. Ray looked around at the shattered chamber, bodies everywhere. cracks splitting the walls, faint blue light bleeding out of the stone dot, and from somewhere deep below, he thought he heard another sound, not screaming this time, but laughter cold, slow waiting asterisk. The final stand, the laughter, echoed faintly at first, like it came from somewhere far below the broken ground, but it grew louder, and closer. Ray stood there, gripping the faintly glowing shard in his hand, staring into the darkness. Around him, the chamber was a ruin, walls split wide open, blue veins of light leaking like blood. The air itself seemed thicker now, alive, with something he could not name. The third nurse knelt beside the shattered cage, her hands shaking, her glowing eyes dimmer than before. Ray finally asked her, his voice hoarse, "You said it would die, so why do I still hear it?" She didn't. Look at him. Her answer was barely a whisper, because this was never its body. Ray's chest tightened. He looked down at the ashes of the creature in the cage, already fading into the cracks of the floor, carried away by some invisible wind. Then what the hell did I just kill? He demanded. The nurse finally met his gaze. Her expression was full of something he hadn't seen in her before. Terror. "You killed its chain," she said. Ray's blood ran cold. Before he could speak, the ground beneath his boots began to shake again, harder than before. Stones fell from the ceiling. The faint veins of blue light on the walls now pulsed, faster and brighter, almost like a heartbeat. From the cracked floor in the center of the chamber, something rose. At first, it was just black smoke. Then it took form, a massive shadow, darker than anything around it, filling the space like a storm cloud. It had no shape, and yet too many shapes. Long arms, wings that never fully opened, eyes that appeared and disappeared like sparks. Its voice was deep and layered, and it didn't come from its mouth. It came from everywhere. "Thank you." Ray staggered backward. The third nurse fell to her knees. "You set it free," she murmured. The shadow leaned toward them, its faint eyes settling on Ray. "You tried to kill me," it said almost gently, "but all you destroyed was the prison they built to hold me." Ray's hands shook around the shard. "What are you?" he demanded. It didn't answer right away. Instead, it stretched its arm toward the cracked walls. Wherever it touched, the stone melted into nothing, revealing stars. But not the stars Ray knew. These were red and sharp and wrong, burning in a black sky full of screams. Ray stepped back. The creature spoke. "Again, you humans call me many things. Demon, God, disease, hunger, but I am none of those. I am what waits when the light dies." The third nurse stood now, her rod clutched in both hands. "We can still stop it," she hissed to Ray. But the creature laughed again, a sound that rattled his teeth. "Stop me?" it whispered. "You can't even stop yourselves." The ground cracked wider, and from the fissures below, hands, twisted, black, clawed, began to reach up. Bodies pulled themselves out of the darkness. The soldiers Ray had lost. Earlierjones Barrett. Lane. All of them now crawling toward him, their faces stretched and hollow, their eyes pits of black fire. Ray raised his gun, but the third nurse grabbed his wrist. "Bullets won't matter now," she said. "Then what?" He snapped. Her eyes glowed faintly again. "You still have the shard," she said, "but it needs blood to finish the seal." Ray frowned. "Whose blood?" She didn't answer, but she pressed his hand, the one holding the shard, to her own chest. Her voice was quiet, steady. "Mine." Ray's eyes widened. "You'll die," he said. She nodded. "We already died a long time ago," she said, almost smiling. The creature above roared, its form growing larger. The corrupted soldiers closed in, their claws clicking against the stone. Ray looked at the nurse, then at the creature. Then he shoved the shard into her chest. She gasped, but didn't fight. Her blood, faintly blue and glowing, poured over the shard. The light grew brighter, almost blinding. Ray ripped the shard free and turned toward the creature. The nurse fell to her knees, her body fading like smoke. Now, she whispered. Ray raised the shard high. The creature lunged at him, its massive black claws slamming down. Ray threw the shard with all his strength. It flew straight into the creature's center, and for the first time, it screamed. A terrible, deafening sound. The entire chamber shook as light poured out of its wound. The creature thrashed wildly, its form unraveling like mist in a storm. The corrupted soldiers shrieked and dropped, their bodies disintegrating into ash. The walls cracked open completely, and beyond them was only emptiness, endless stars. Dark and hungry. Ray stumbled back, shielding his face from the light. The creature roared one last time, its voice breaking into thousands of whispers, and then it exploded into nothing, leaving only silence. The chamber was gone, the walls, the cage, the nurses, the blue veins. Everything. Ray lay on cold stone, staring up at a quiet black sky. He could still feel the shard, even though it was no longer in his hand, a faint warmth lingering in his chest. He sat up slowly. The battlefield was empty. His men were gone. The nurses were gone. Even the stars above felt wrong. Then, from somewhere behind him, a faint whisper. You can't kill the dark. You can only trade places with it. Ray turned. In the shadows, something moved. Faint, familiar. And the faint laughter began again. Asterisk. The end or not? The laughter faded into silence. Ray stood alone on the cold, cracked stone. The battlefield was gone. No walls, no cage, no nurses, no soldiers. Nothing but a flat black plain stretching forever in every direction. The sky above him was darker than space, and the air felt heavy, full of invisible whispers he couldn't quite understand. He took a step forward, his boots scraping against the ground. No sound but his own breath. Where am I? He muttered. There was no answer. He looked at his hands. The faint glow of the shard still pulsed under his skin, faint lines of light running along his veins. He could feel it now, not just in his hand, but in his chest, in his head, like it was alive. He dropped to his knees and slammed his fist into the ground. It's over, he growled. You're dead. I killed you. It's over. But the whisper came again, not soft, mocking. Over? Oh, human, it never ends. It only changes. Ray spun around, scanning the empty black plain. At the edge of his vision, something moved. A faint figure walking toward him, slow, steady. His grip tightened on the shard's light. Show yourself, he shouted. The figure stepped closer. Got it. Was himself, but not quite. It looked like him. Wore the same armor, carried the same weapon, but its eyes were completely black, and its smile was too wide, full of sharp teeth. Ray raised his gun instinctively, though he knew it wouldn't matter. What the hell are you? He demanded. The figure tilted its head slightly, like it was amused. I'm you, it said. The you that made the deal when you threw the shard. Ray froze. What deal? The figure chuckled softly. You really thought you killed me? Poor little commander. You didn't destroy me. You replaced me. Ray staggered back. You're lying. But the figure pointed to his chest. Ray looked down. The faint blue light under his skin was brighter now, crawling up his neck, his arms, his face. His veins glowed like the walls of the old chamber. His reflection, faint on the black ground, was already beginning to change. His eyes flickered black for just a second. The whispers grew louder. He chose to fight, and now he rules. Ray clutched at his chest, dropping to his knees. Memories flashed in his mind, the cage shattering, the creature screaming, the nurses falling, the battlefield breaking apart, and a feeling deep inside him, like something curling around his soul. A cold voice inside him spoke clearly now. You are strong enough to kill. Now you are strong enough to become. Ray shook his head. No, he muttered. This isn't real. I beat you. I won. The figure crouched in front of him, its black eyes inches from his. You didn't win. You inherited. It ground around. Them cracked open again. From the fractures, more figures rose. Soldiers he'd fought with, nurses he'd killed, creatures he'd burned, all staring at him with hollow black eyes, their mouths whispering the same word. Commander? The figure, the shadow of himself, stood and extended a hand toward him. Stand up, it said softly. It's time to lead your army. Ray stared at the hand, then at the endless dark all around him. For the first time, he understood. Creature was never just locked in the cage, It was waiting for someone strong enough to finish what it started, someone to wear the crown of darkness willingly. Ray closed his eyes. He could still feel the faint warmth of the shard inside him. But it no longer burned. Now it felt. Right, when he opened his eyes again, they were black. The whispers stopped. The figures around him fell silent. Watching, Ray stood. The shadow smiled faintly and stepped back. Vanishing into the darkness, Ray clenched his fist, and the faint blue light around him flared, spreading out in waves across the black plain. The soldiers, nurses, and creatures dropped to one knee, their heads bowed. The ground shifted beneath him, rising into a throne of jagged stone. He sat on it, and for the first time, the voice inside him was his own. I am commander now. The darkness beyond the plain stirred, and something massive and ancient opened its countless eyes. Staring back at him, Ray smiled faintly. Let's begin. The black plain started to move, like the surface of a dark ocean, waves of shadows, rushing outward into the stars, carrying his army into the endless night. Far away, a faint human voice crackled over some forgotten radio. Mission Control, do you copy? Commander Ray, are you out there? Ray heard it, and for a brief moment, something human in him almost answered. But instead, he leaned back on his throne, closed his black eyes, and let the dark consume him. Completely, the last whisper carried across the void. You wanted to win. Now you are what victory looks like. And the stars went out, one by one,